friend of a friend was either at a yard sale or a thrift store and came across a piece of audio gear that wasn't priced for very much money. He ended up buying it and he gave it to my friend to have me check it out for him. And that piece of equipment was this Dynaco ST80 stereo amplifier made around 1971-72 in that vintage. It was available in kit form or you could buy it already assembled. When I got the unit, the cover wasn't fastened down. As I started to lift it up, the output transistors with the heatsink came up with the cover, and that was not a good sign. And you'll see in the tour in a little bit kind of just what it looked like inside. Basically, it was not something I wanted to work on after somebody who had been in there who did not know what they were doing had screwed things up. I told him that and was waiting to give it back to him when a light bulb went off, and I got to thinking that, hey, I could fit a little Class D amplifier and maybe even the power supply inside this. That would be kind of cool. I asked my friend to ask his friend if he would sell it to me, and my friend came back to me and said, it's yours. I immediately gutted it, with the exception of the on-off switch, and went to work on trying to get a small Class D amplifier. One of the companies that I reached out to was Fosi Audio, and they provided me their V3 power amplifier along with the 48 volt 5 amp power supply. A big shout out goes to Eric at Fosi Audio for getting me the amplifier and the power supply, and I do really appreciate that. While I was waiting for the V3 to arrive, I immediately started modifying things like the speaker terminals. I replaced those with three-way binding post speaker terminals, as well as replacing the RCA input jacks on the back. And you'll see all the mods I did, and I kind of explain how I did them. There were a few little things I did differently maybe than other people, but everything worked out well, and this is the completed Restomod Fosi V3 ST80, as I'm calling it. Restomod is a term that's used a lot in the audio world, where they may get rid of their old engine and put in a modern fuel injection engine, that kind of thing. And that's kind of what I did with this. There are other options. There is a website, I believe it's Do-It-Yourself Dynaco, that specializes in new boards and kits for these that you could do, but I thought it would be more fun to go with the small Class D amplifier. So what you're going to see is kind of how it came to me, the mods I made to it, and then of course there will be the data that I measured, and lastly how it sounded and was to use. Here is a side view of the ST80, and I wanted to point out a few things. You can kind of see right here there was a sticker that said sold, and that was in red, and then there's this other partial remains of a sticker that had $10 written on it. So this was purchased at a yard sale or possibly some sort of a thrift store. The first thing I noticed were these funny speaker terminals. I have never seen a Dynaco ST80 before, and I thought these speaker connectors were a little odd. And what was even more odd was there were two 8 ohm resistors here. They're probably a couple watt. Of course, you can see your RCA unbalanced inputs there. So then I just figured the next thing to do is to pull the cover off, which just slides in and out. There's no screws to remove. So let's see what that looks like. So I pulled off the cover, and the first thing that was odd was this heatsink just fell down, and you can see right here on this resistor, that resistor is not connected to anything, and there's another wire there that's not going anywhere. The boards are obviously loose. They should be mounted into these slots on the heat sinks. You can kind of see, looks like fresh grease there, and then you know, it's not attached to anything. That's always a good sign. And you can see kind of got real hot here. It's pretty dusty, but you know, there's wires loose, and kind of just gives you a little bit of an idea that somebody had been in here, and I don't like working on something like that, especially on an older unit. And this kind of just gives another view of the ST80, and you can kind of just see we've got coils here for the speaker outputs. They wrap around these capacitors, and what I decided to do is that I am going to create a Restomod where I put a modern amplifier in this vintage case, and it'll probably work better. The first thing I did after gutting the ST80 was to cut out the old speaker binding posts that I showed earlier, and I used a Dremel tool with a grinding wheel to grind away the material that they're on. You can see there's some of the original material here, and then I had some three-way binding posts that fit really nicely, really perfectly in there, and you'll see on the other side what they look like. And then I replaced the RCA jacks and put these gold-plated RCA jacks in, which extend further out. Now I wanted to keep all the rivets in place. I didn't want to have to find rivets or deal with the holes, so you'll see on the other side, on the RCA jacks, you'll see how I cut out the material that was holding the old RCA jack, some kind of a wood or plastic material that was fairly easy to cut out with the Dremel tool, and let's go see what that looks like. Here's an inside view showing the modifications. You can see the speaker binding poster right here, and this style has a plastic piece on either side, and it just so happened to fit once I had cut out the old speaker mounts that they had, and I kept the rivets in place. Now the RCA jacks are right here obviously, and they're the solderable kind. I bought cables which had wires stripped on one end and then they went into an RCA on the others, and that will plug into the Fosi amplifier. And you can still see the material just under the rivet. I didn't want to deal with the rivet holes like I said, so I just was able to grind away that material that held the old RCA jacks in place, and everything seems like it's going to work just fine. The Fosi V3 amplifier arrived yesterday. We'll open it up and see what we get. Here is our 48 volt 5 amp power supply with the power cord for it, a little manual, and here is the V3. Here is a front view of the V3 with its power switch and volume control knob. That obviously is the rear of the V3. We have our two line inputs, a preamp output, which probably could go to a subwoofer, and then we have our speaker binding post connectors and our power supply input. So I kind of wanted to set the Fosi amplifier and power supply inside the chassis to see how everything would fit best, and I think this is going to work just fine. I have to come up with a way to mount the items down, and that shouldn't be too difficult. And the big key is they have to be far enough away from the edges so that the case can fit down in it, because the case kind of has some sides on it that go in. So anyway, it looks like everything will mount up just nicely once I get the units strapped down. Here is the completed version of the ST80/Fosi V3 Restomod, as I'm calling it. The brackets right here, this guy and this guy, that are holding down the two Fosi pieces are found at a hardware store. I believe they're plumber's mounting brackets, and these are actually galvanized, and I went over them with a marker so they don't shine as much when you're looking at the case from the front. Now, they are easy to cut with some tin snips, and they work very well, and you'll see the bottom, they're just screwed down, and you'll kind of see there's some nuts there. They share a common nut here, and then there's another one here, and I did have to cut some slots in the bottom of the case to get that to fit, and you'll see that in a moment. You can see our power cord was cut. It plugs into the power supply here, and then I attach it to the original switch here, and there is a light on it. I'll go ahead and turn it on. You can see that it lights up, and it's the original ST80 resistor switch with some kind of a lamp. I don't know exactly what the lamp is, but that's kind of what it looks like, and it had a fuse holder. There is currently a 2.5 amp fuse there. If you come over here, you can see that the speaker terminals are all soldered down, and the wire that I used was 16 gauge speaker wire, and I soldered that into banana jacks which plug into all of the speaker connectors on the back of the Fosi. It worked out very nicely, and they're probably only a couple inches long. The DC power cord, which plugs into here from the power supply, was shortened quite a bit, and I soldered it, and the connections that were soldered are underneath the shrink tubing, and so everything fits real nicely. Obviously our RCA jacks that are soldered here and here plug into there. I'm very pleased with the way everything fits. I ultimately will have this volume control knob taped as well as RTV'd to the case, and it'll be at a fixed volume around 25 dB of gain. I did have to do a slight modification to the cover for the ST80, and I had to cut out little notches right here, and then there's another one right here. Hopefully you can see those, and that is for those straps to fit through that hold the amplifier and the power supply down. It's not anything that you will ever see. It just was something that needed to be done for the case to fit down all the way. This is a bottom view, and it kind of just shows that there's venting underneath the amplifier, and you can see where I had my screws that I used for mounting running there. And I only had to make a few holes. I believe there's one hole here, this hole right here, and this hole, and those slots just were widened, and everything kind of just worked out really nicely as far as the way things fit. Here is the completed Dynaco ST80 / Fosi V3 Restomod with the cover on. It looks pretty much the same at first glance, although if you look closely enough by the Dynaco label at the top, you can see the green LED from the power supply, and I'm going to keep that there. You could hide it with some tape or black RTV, but I think it's fine to have that there. Anyway, that is what it looks like all completed. Right now, the Restomod with the Fosi V3 is putting out about 5 watts per channel into 8 ohm loads. Now, the volume control was set and fixed with RTV and tape so that the gain is about 25 dB. You can see at 1 kilohertz, we're about 0.3 of a dB difference. The left channel has a little bit more gain. There is no balance control on this unit. That's just what it is. You can see our THDs are pretty low, better than 0.003%, we'll say. SNR is right around 84 dB, and the THD plus noise right around minus 83, 84 dB. So overall, it does not look too bad at 5 watts. Here we have the Fosi V3 / ST80 Restomod unit putting out about 5 watts into 4 ohm loads in this case. Now, I should mention once again, I've got the volume control glued down, fastened down, and it's putting out about 25 dB of gain or so into those 4 ohm loads. The specification in the owner's manual for the V3 says that the THD should be better than 0.003%, and we are, in this case, with it at 5 watts. Also, it says the signal to noise ratio should be greater than 110 dB. Well, we're way a ways from that. We're at, we'll call it 84, 85 dB. Other than that, it doesn't look too bad. THD plus noise minus 83, 84 dB. So overall, it looks fairly good when it's going into 4 ohm loads. Here we have the frequency response of the Fosi V3 putting out about 5 watts per channel into 8 ohm loads. The frequency range, of course, is 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And you can see that at 20 kilohertz, we've got about a half a dB of gain. And at the low frequency end, we're maybe down 0.05 dB or so. The channel balance is about 0.3 of a dB here at 1 kilohertz. Here is the Fosi V3 / ST80 Restomod's frequency response with it putting out about 5 watts into 4 ohm loads. The frequency range is 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. The specification is actually that it should be within plus or minus 0.1 dB. That is what is in the owner's manual. And you can see we may be that for the low end of the band. But once we hit 20 kilohertz, we're down, 1.2 dB or so. So it's failing that at the high end. At 10 kilohertz, we're only down half a dB, but it definitely seems to perform worse into 4 ohm loads than it did into 8 ohm loads as far as the frequency response is concerned. Our channel balance is still about the same. They're within 0.3 of a dB or so. Here is a plot showing the output impedance / damping factor of the Fosi V3. If we look at the damping factor, these two thicker curves here, at 1 kilohertz, they're 80 to maybe 85 for the damping factor, and at 1 kilohertz, the output impedance is, 0.1 ohms. So it does get worse as the frequency increases, and in the case of the damping factor, we're only at about a damping factor of 5 at 20 kilohertz. Right now we're looking at the Fosi V3's Crosstalk with the active channel putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms, and this is with it installed in the ST80 chassis, just how it would be used. There is no specification for Crosstalk for the V3. Our frequency range, of course, is 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and we have better than 58 dB of crosstalk, which would be right here at 20 kilohertz. I should point out that the volume control has been fixed at about 25 dB of gain. Here is the Fosi V3's Multitone Response, and this is into an 8 ohm load, and I'm just showing the left channel. It's displaying a distortion-free range of between about 12 to 16 bits. Right now, the Fosi V3 Restomod is putting out 100 watts into 8 ohm loads for the left channel, and we'll call it 94 watts into 8 ohm loads for the right channel. You can see our distortion looks really good. It's better than 0.02%. SNRs, 65 dB and 70 dB for the right channel. The THD plus noise is looking fairly good, and the gain is still about 25 dB for both channels, we'll call it. Now I'm going to increase the input signal level and see where this thing really starts going bad, or the protect circuit kicks on, whatever comes first. We'll go up in a half a dB increment, and it looks like the left channel noise level has really gotten worse. Our SNR is now 50 dB, and our distortion looks pretty good. And we're at 112 watts for the left channel. I'm just going to kick up another half a dB increment, see if we can get it to shut off. And it looks like it's still putting out power, 124 watts. Of course, SNR is not very good, and our distortion is over 1%. So I'm going to call it a day with this right now. But that's pretty good for this little package to put out that much power, although it is kind of noisy. Right now, we have the Fosi V3 / ST80 Restomod putting out 73 watts into 4 ohm loads for the left channel, and we'll call it 69 watts into a 4 ohm load for the right channel. Everything looks good as far as THD and SNR, and what I wanted to find out is what happens when we increase our input signal level such that our output signal level increases and how much power we can actually get out into 4 ohm loads. I'm going to increase the input signal by 0.1 dB, and let's see what happens. So we're at 74 watts and 70 watts into 4 ohm loads. We're still doing okay. THD looks pretty good. SNRs look pretty good. Let's increase it by 0.1 dB. Now we're putting out 76 watts into 4 ohm loads, and it died. So it doesn't really like much higher than a minus 0.4 dBV signal, at least at 1 kilohertz, before it goes into its protect mode. Now what happens when it goes into protect mode is you have to turn off the power and listen for the relay click. I don't think we'll hear it. Let me see if we will. Here's the Fosi V3 ST80 Restomod's THD versus power and frequency, and this is for 8 ohm loads. The specification, according to the V3's owner's manual, is the THD should be better than 0.003%. I think they're off a couple decimal points. We're actually better than maybe 0.3%, which is pretty good here at the higher end of the band. And overall, it looks pretty good regardless of the power level, from 1 watt to 80 watts. Now, I should also point out that there is 0.3 dB of difference between the balance of the two channels. So the left channel is going to be a slightly higher than the right channel's power. Here's a plot for the V3 ST80 Restomod. THD versus frequency and power for 4 ohm loads, and we're just showing the left channel. Keep in mind that Fosi specifies that the V3 should be less than 0.03%, and we're better than 0.2%, which actually is pretty good overall. So the power levels are from 1 watt to 70 watts. Here are the Fosi V3 Harmonics, with it putting out about 5 watts into 8 ohm loads, and the volume control is set for 25 dB of gain. Kind of mixed results. The second order even right harmonic is higher than the right third harmonic, the odd harmonic. However, the left odd harmonic is higher than the even second harmonic. So it's kind of mixed results, and it kind of just shows you what's going on as far as the harmonics. Right now we're looking at the system noise level of the Fosi V3/ST80 Restomod. And the outputs are connected to 8 ohm loads, and the inputs are connected to shorts. And we're just looking at the system noise level. There's not really a specification for the noise level under these conditions, but it's really pretty good. It's better than minus 100 dBV down. So this would be a very quiet amplifier, I'm guessing, when connected to some speakers. Right now we're looking at the rise time of the output of the Fosi V3/Dynaco ST80 Restomod amplifier. Our input signal is the purple signal, and it's a square wave at 1 kilohertz, and the output signal is in yellow. You can see that its rise time is 3.46 microseconds. This is kind of a difficult measurement to make with a Class D amplifier. The little signal you see here is at about 625 kilohertz, which is probably the frequency of the switching power supply of the Fosi V3. There is no specification, of course, for the rise time of this amplifier. It's just kind of here for curiosity's sake. Here is the difference in phase between the input and the output of the Fosi V3/ST80 Restomod, and this is for a 1 kilohertz square wave. You can see there's a small amount of phase difference, but it's very, very small. At 100 hertz, that phase difference is greater, and at 10 kilohertz, it's a bit less than at 100 hertz, but there still is some phase difference between the input and the output signal. This is the phase difference between the output, so there's not really that much difference at 1 kilohertz. There's maybe a degree or two between the left and right channels, and at 10 kilohertz, same thing. There's very little difference in phase between the left and right channels.
I should point out that the Fosi V3 is actually an integrated amplifier. I just decided to fix the gain at 25 dB and use it as a power amplifier only. If you are doing your own little Restomod, you may choose to have access to the volume control. I didn't need it for this project. Like all of the Class D amplifiers that I've looked at, the specifications in their user's manual seem to be way off. I don't really know where they get the measurements that they post in there, but this was no exception, and the measurements were way off from what I measured. As you saw, it performed decently. What was interesting was that the power rating at 1 kilohertz into 8 ohm loads was around 92, 93 to 100 watts depending on the channel. And that was higher than the 4 ohm power rating, which was in the 70 watts into 4 ohms at 1 kilohertz. So normally the 8 ohm is half of the 4 ohm, but not always. In this case, it did not perform as well into 4 ohm loads. Now, as far as the frequency response, it was just a little bit better into 8 ohm loads. So I don't know if I just had something going on with this particular unit that I got. It was brand new, but it seemed to function fine, but that was just one little quirk that I noticed. I thought it had really low distortion, and to get 100 watts out of something that size and it doesn't really get hot was pretty impressive. Now, as far as it heating up, it never really got more than slightly warm to the touch. During my testing, when I started really boosting up the power, it would go into a protect mode at one point, and that would be over 100 watts into 8 ohm loads. And at that point, you had to turn the volume / on-off switch off, or just kill the power to the DC power supply, and then it would reset once it powered back on. There is apparently a small relay that you can hear click on
after a few seconds when the volume control is turned to the on position. One thing I wished it had, and I haven't seen that on any little Class D amps, is a balance control. The two channels were off about 0.3 of a dB, which is not a big deal, and it's something I doubt you would hear, but for measurements I would like to always have the channels balanced as much as possible. Possibly they could have a potentiometer in there, a trim pot that you could adjust, but it seems to be the case with most of these amplifiers that each channel is off a little bit as far as the channel balance. Other than that, I thought, it performed well. It's pretty quiet. THD was good. When it got up to the higher power levels, the SNR dropped down a bit, but overall, I thought it did a pretty good job for something this size. So with all that being said, I hooked it up to my Wilson Watt 3 Puppy 2 loudspeakers. I terminated the inputs and just listened for hum and noise, and there was absolutely none. It's very, very quiet. I then hooked it up to my Carver C1 preamplifier and my DAP and listened to a variety of music. I pushed it to SPLs as high as 94, 95 dB, which is pretty loud. It never stressed. It sounded just fine, and it does a good job. I think most people would not know that what was inside this. They go, oh, that's a neat piece of old audio gear. So, if you're looking to do something like that, the Fosi V3 is a neat little choice for that project. It turns out that one of the participants of the AB audio test that I did with the Yamaha CR1020 and the Ayima A08 Pro amplifier has both an original ST80 or almost original ST80 as well as an ST80 where the boards were replaced with the do-it-yourself Dynaco boards and other mods. I asked if I could get his original ST80 that has been modified in the sense that the big capacitors have all been replaced. There's a total of 5 of them. So those were replaced, but it still has the original output devices and driver boards for the output stage. So he gave that to me. So in my next video, I'm going to take his sort of original ST80 and put it on the bench and see how it does, and then do a listening test between the Restomod Fosi V3 Dynaco ST80 and a nearly original ST80. If you like this video, thumbs up please. If you have not subscribed to the channel, I hope you will subscribe. As always, you can leave your comments and questions at the appropriate place, and I try to answer them as best I can. And I'm hoping that there will not be hate comments for replacing the innards with the Class D amplifier instead of going at least the do-it-yourself Dynaco route with modern boards and that kind of thing. It's really not the same as a friend of mine's brother took his 58 fuel injection Corvette, pulled the engine and transmission out, and is converting it to an e-Corvette. So that to me is a big sin, but replacing the innards of this guy with a Class D amplifier to me is a whole different kind of a beast. So once again, I thank you for watching, and until next time, have a great day or night.